Thanks a minute.
Your slides aren't showing anymore.
Oh boy.
So to those of us who are the audience, I just want to explain. So our usual technical person is on her honeymoon. Allie is on her honeymoon. And so we're just trying our best to get this to go smoothly. But once we get going, I'm sure we'll be fine. But I apologize to everybody and thank you for your patience.
All right, let me do this now.
Perfect. There you go.
Okay. All right, so breath, it's the first thing we do when we are born into this world. It's the last thing we do when we leave. And for an average 80-year-old human being who breathes at about 16 breaths a minute, which computes into 960 breaths an hour, 23,000 breaths in a day, and 8.5 million breaths in a year, that's about 672,768,000 breaths in a lifespan. And yet, how aware are we of our breathing unless we have dis-ease of our breath? Breath is an essential rhythm as much as it is an act that we can control. In fact, it's happening right there in the background as you are watching these slides. And if you had to bring awareness to your breathing and then even control to your breathing, you can create wonderful states within you in terms of wellness or sometimes even stress. So it's one of those amazing physiological functions, unlike the heart, Dara, that you can control. There's been a lot of explosion in terms of the interest in breath work over the last 3 years, especially given our collective asphyxiation as a species from the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of you have heard of Wim Hof, probably even read this book by James Nestor called Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, some of which I'll be talking about in the talk today. I'm a ICU physician, I'm a pulmonary physician, and I'm also a sleep physician. So the glue to all of my subspecialty training is breath. I remember vividly having nightmares of COVID-19 in March and April when this thing started on the West Coast and was moving slowly east. And there was a WhatsApp message that went through our batch of colleagues which remind us appropriately about what it is that we do with the air that we breathe. And it simply said that if we all survive this, as I hope we shall, remember this, that when it came down to it, we didn't fight for land or weapons or house or jewelry. We didn't fight for concert tickets or fancy designations or religion. We didn't fight for shares in a company or a seat at the table. We didn't fight for business class tickets or the keys to a house by the beach. When all this is over, remember that we fought for air. So who are the better breathers amongst us? Are they the athletes? Are they the deep sea free divers? Are they the mountain climbers? Are they the saints and the yogis amongst us? Who are they? Because breath is a healthy choice. There are many, many traditions out there online if you had to just explore breath work, which espouse how to breathe. It's not something that I was taught as a fellow at the MGH. It was certainly not something that I was taught in medical school. I was taught how to diagnose disease. I was taught how to make people better with devices and inhalers and oxygen. But I was never taught to teach them how to breathe. And a lot of these traditions, they talk about slowing it down with breath, whether it's voluntarily or through reflexive deceleration of breathing from a different state, such as mindfulness or meditation. Diaphragmatic breathing, Tumo, holotropic breath work, Wim Hof, Buteyko, Lamaze, 478, box breathing, in my opinion, all come from the overlying umbrella of pranayama. It was an article when I was a fellow that really changed the trajectory of my work. Because as fellows, we were trained to look at pulmonary function. And when I looked at my pulmonary function and my blood gases, they were a little off compared with the 4 others in my group who had fairly normal spirometry and lung function. My breathing rate was a little slower than the rest, and my CO2 levels on a blood gas were slightly elevated. And I started to research this, and I found something dating back to 1981 in the Journal of Applied Physiology, where this had actually been looked at, where people who had been doing yoga and pranayama and breath work for many years, anywhere between 4 to 12 years in training, these were Belgians that had this strange breathing pattern of breathing deeper, almost twice as deep as the normal controls who were sex matched and height matched. And they also breathe slower. So almost 5 breaths a minute compared with the 13.5 breaths per minute. So this struck with me in terms of, was I one of them? And was it by virtue of the yoga that I had done for many, many years? Pranayama, which we'll talk about today, is a part of the Ashtanga 8-limb path of yoga in India. And so what are the 8 limbs? The 8 limbs simply ascribe to the yamas and the niyamas, which are the ethical precepts and the virtuous behaviors. Asana, which is very popular in the West. Breath extension or control, which is pranayama, which we'll talk about today, which sets the table for inward focus, pratyahara, concentration, dharana, transcendence of thought, dhyana, and samadhi, which is the emancipation of the soul. Prana and yama are 2 words. Prana is the vital energy or the force that animates all of existence, whether it's animate or whether it's inanimate. Yama is the act of controlling prana. There's a beautiful aphorism in one of the yogic wisdom books which simply states that as the vital force of energy or prana is required for one's existence, the very purpose of pranayama is attaining a pristine mind. Not a pristine body, a pristine mind. I have now, over the last 5 to 7 years, been teaching this to my patients and even online, espousing the best principles from this wisdom tradition to teach it in a safe manner with science validating whatever I teach, emphasizing the control of the exhale, rhythm and resonance of the breath, uniformity of the breath throughout in terms of airflow, attention to proper posture, the value of nose over mouth breathing, comfortable suspension of the breath or voluntary apnea, and prolongation of breath with ratios and breath holds. Today's lesson will be about slow breathing. It's called Breathfully Slow. As you can see, it's a wordplay on mindfulness. I've labeled them lessons in breathfulness. So it's a 7-step program that I teach online and sometimes in person. Finally, we're able to share breath together. But it's about slow breathing that we're going to talk about today. And I had requested as a prerequisite to this class that all of you be dressed lightly and comfortably and be relatively light on an empty stomach. So not eat too much, because it can be pretty discomforting when you start to do breath work on a full stomach. We will also emphasize the value of sitting tall, preferably with hips higher than our knees. And we sometimes use metronomes, which I'm going to use music today to teach you a couple of breathing techniques. There's also great value in nasal cleansing and patency. So where does this come from? Where does pranayama come from? There is a wisdom book called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, written in Sanskrit. And it's written in prose. There are 192 aphorisms in this book. And we don't know who Patanjali was, whether it was one person or a collection of people, but this is 6,000 years ago. And Patanjali simply states that in this book, when I teach you how to breathe, how to sit, how to meditate, if you understand the first 4 aphorisms in this book, you will understand what I'm trying to impart to you in the remaining 188. And so what are the first 4 sutras? Now begins the exposition or the teaching of yoga. Number 2, yoga is the progressive settling down of the mind. not of the body, not of the breath, but of the mind into the field of pure silence. When the mind is silent, we are established in our essential state of being. We are human beings after all. We have come to confuse ourselves as human doings and human thinkings, but essentially we are human beings. And number 4, our essential state is generally overshadowed by the activity of the mind. And how true is that? We seem to be speeding in 100 different directions all at once. So where is this silence? This silence sits in the spaces between our thoughts, in that little pause between our breath. It is said that the thinker of the thought, the breather of the breath, the doer of the deed is in that space between the thought, between the breath. And there are 2 characteristics to that thinker, the idea generator. 1, he or she is silent, because if it wasn't, you would be experiencing it as a thought, as a breath, as a deed. And the second, that it's an infinite choice, the ultimate probability. It's a field of all choice making, all possibilities. It's an eternal choice. He goes on to ask that if that space between your thoughts is silent and an eternal possibility, and that space between my thoughts is silent and an eternal possibility, is there a difference between you and me? And the answer to that is both yes and no at the same time, based on where you are having the experience of the gap. So at the level of the surface, all the way at the top of the ocean, we are different. And we are different because we are conditioned differently. Such that if I was now thirsty and I had the intention to quench my thirst with water, the act of drinking water for me is a karmic episode. So it's karma, it's action. Action generates some kind of memory in my awareness. The act of drinking water is pleasant for me, such that when I have the desire to quench my thirst in the future, based on the memory of what this did for me, I will either choose to replicate it or might choose something else, orange juice or a diet soda. And that is the conditioning, that is the operational software to each of us, is our conditioning, is our choice making, which is a function of prior actions, prior memories, and future desires. But then, when we go down further, all the way from the surface of the ocean, where we are individual waves, each one being different, each one having its own character, and we dive about 10 meters deep, and we look up and we say, the experience over here is a little different from what was happening at the surface. It seems a little more quiet. And we then say, why not dive deeper? And we keep diving and diving until we reach the ocean bed, where now there is no distinction between you and me. And so Patanjali says that at that level of experience, in that domain of experience, there is no difference. In that gap between you and me, we are both silent and we are an infinite choice-making possibility. So when you have the experience of the wave, that's you and me in space and time. You take a snapshot, you freeze it, that's a space-time event that we experience in our waking reality. But when you transcend that experience through any practice, and in yoga, it's meditation, asana, pranayama, you have the experience of something else. So who are you? Well, you're both. You're both the wave and the ocean. So you can see that in the construct of yogic being, at the very bottom of this triangle, we are matter. And as we dive down from the surface of the ocean all the way to the ocean bed, we are energy. The energy dives down deeper into the construct of what we call the subtle body, where the ego, the intellect, and the mind sits. And as we dive even further, we have the experience of that spaceless, timeless, dimensionless aspect within of us, which is the soul or the spirit. And yoga is the journey from here to there and back. How do we make that journey? We make that journey with sound. And why is sound so important? Because sound is the most subtle of all our five senses. There is a beautiful aphorism again in another wisdom book called the Upanishads, which simply states that the essence of earth, or the most subtle aspect of earth, is water. The essence of water are plants. The essence of plants is the human being. The essence of human beings is speech. The essence of speech is thoughts, words, and ideas. We hear our thoughts. The essence of thoughts, words, and ideas is sound. And the essence of sound is primordial sound, or sound without meaning, or pure vibration. And the essence of primordial sound or vibration is awareness itself. So that's why when we use the instrument of sound, we make this journey from here to there and back. And that's what mantra is. Man, mind, tra, instrument of. And that's been used for many, many years to help create this state of silence within each of us. In fact, mantra was first studied in the TM tradition and ratified by looking at the physiology of transcendental meditation, where it's a wakeful, hypo-metabolic physiological state. Everything slows down, but the mind is awake, completely awake. There's complete coherence across the EEG spectrum, even though the blood pressure is down, the heart rate is down, the breath rate is down, oxygen consumption comes down, lactic acid drops, but you are fully, fully awake. So let's get into this first lesson. I'm going to stop sharing my screen over here, and I'm going to now teach you a couple of breathing techniques which emphasize the value of sound. The first one is called the Ujjayi breath, or the victory breath. It's a very popular technique in yoga, but this is the one technique that if I had hoped for every man, woman, and child on planet Earth to do 5 minutes a day, this is the one I would teach. It's Ujjayi. Some of you may have already practiced this. Some of you have heard of this as coherent breathing, or the ocean breath, or resistive breathing. But this is the value of sound with breath, emphasizing that vibration on the exhale. All right, so I'm going to demonstrate what this is, then we're going to do it for a few minutes. I'm going to teach you this practice playing music to the sound of Ujjayi, and then I'll pause over there and take a few questions in case anyone has questions. All right, so the sound of Ujjayi is generated by creating a ha, H-H-A-A-H sound on the exhale. It's similar to as if you were fogging the eyeglasses before you clean them. So if you took your glasses off, those of you who have the glasses, and just simply that's the sound that you will create. It's a constriction at the level of the vocal cords of the glottis, which only you should be able to hear. Your partner should not. It's so quiet, it's so soft, but it's coming all the way from the vocal cords on the exhale breath. So we do it with the mouth open first. Let's all do it together. Imagine glasses off. It'll be nostril inhale, but mouth exhale. And each one is different, right? But I want you to emphasize the uniformity of the exhale, all the way from the beginning of the exhale to the end of the exhale. I want you to keep it smooth. Mouth exhale, ha, all the way out. Nostril inhale, quiet. Mouth exhale, ha, silent nostril inhale. Mouth exhale, ha, silent nostril inhale. All right? Once you have mastered that sound with the mouth open, now I want you to do it with the mouth closed. So you're going to be breathing out but through the nose, still creating that sound at the level of the vocal cords. All right? So you can either feel your throat and feel that vibration as you breathe out through the nose, nostril inhale, but nostril exhale this time with that sound, hearing your breath as a vibration. That vibration is similar to the wind rustling through the leaves in a forest, or the ocean lapping up as waves on the beach, or the water gushing through the pipes of the basement in the apartment next door. That's the sound which you want to appreciate at the level of the vocal cords through the nose on the exhale. So nostril inhale quietly. Nostril exhale, hearing that vibration. Once more. That is the sound of Ujjayi Pranayama, or what's called the victory breath. I am now going to play a 4-minute musical rhythm which will pace our Ujjayi practice. Pace our Ujjayi practice. It's going to be a 5-second in, a 5-second out. A 5-second in, a 5-second out. Dara,
100%.
let me know if you can hear this
Yes, I
when I
hear it.
start.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so everyone sit tall, close the eyes. Bring the attention within, just watching the breath. You're going to breathe in and out through the nose first. Starting inhale, exhale. Nose in, nose out. Nose in, but it's going to be mouth out, ha. Nose in, mouth out. Keep it uniform. Nose in, mouth out. Nose in, uniform. Mouth out. Nostril in. Nose in. Now whisper, mouth out. Very soft. Nose in. Whisper. Feel that vibration. Nose in. Very soft. Nostril in, silent. Mouth out, whisper. And now nose in, but it's going to be nose out, creating that same sound on the nostril exhale. Nose in, nose out, Ujjayi. nose out vibration. Nostril in, nostril out. Feel it in the throat, smooth. Hear that sound, feel that sound. Nostril in, nostril out. Nose out. Just come back to the act of normal breathing. Releasing from all doing, just come back to that aspect of watching and being. And as you feel ready, just gently open the eyes. So that's the sound of Ujjayi paced to a metronome, and the metronome over here is a musical rhythm, right? What I had you do by creating that vibration on the exhale is you slowed your breath down to 6 breaths per minute. And hopefully for most of you, it was not a struggle. Because as soon as you apply the resistor on the exhale breath, it's almost like breaking the breath. And you create that sound is soothing to the nervous system. And what we are now doing with slowing the breath down is we are coming into a resonant frequency. So I'm going to share my screen again. And what we just did was developed an appreciation for resonant breathing using the rhythm of our breath, the rhythm of a musical melody to create an accentuation of a phenomenon that's occurring every breath we take. It's called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Oh, I must have done something here again. Sorry. Stop share. Dara, can you see this?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay. So respiratory sinus arrhythmia is a phenomenon that occurs with each breath of a reflexive increase in heart rate with inhale, a reflexive decrease in heart rate with exhale. And this is modulated by cardiac vagal efferent traffic. So breath is the input, the vagus nerve is the output, all mediated through the brain and the central autonomic network. This is also commonly termed as heart rate variability for people who track this using wearable devices. And measuring HRV or heart rate variability is a reliable way of assessing the parasympathetic innervation of the heart or vagal outflow to the heart. Oops. Sorry. So what is resonance? Resonance is the phenomenon of increased amplitude occurring when the frequency of an applied force, which is periodic in nature, is close to the natural frequency of the system on which it acts. The resonant frequency is that frequency at which that response is maximal. So the oscillating force, when applied at the intrinsic resonant frequency of that system, it just maximizes the oscillation, right? And there are many examples of resonance out there. Pavarotti cracking the wine glass with a particular frequency. Soldiers walking out of step on a bridge so as not to have it collapse. The boombox in the car shaking the windows when you have it at a certain frequency. Turns out that there is such a resonant frequency of breathing in the human being. And that tends to reside anywhere between a 10-second breath or 12-second breath. And for most healthy humans, it's generally 5 breaths per minute. Breathing at the resonant frequency allows for a full expression of that vagal slowing on the heart, just by virtue of what the mediators of vagal nerve outflow do on the sinus atrial node. Acetylcholine is that neurotransmitter. The kinetics of acetylcholine are maximized when one breathes at this frequency. It also helps improve the sympathetic modulation of heart rate control. So when you breathe at resonant frequency, there's this full expression of the vagal slowing effects on the heart. This is me actually doing tidal breathing in a lab at Spalding, where I actually had my nerve instrumented. It's called MSNA, or muscle sympathetic nerve activity, while having a simultaneous assessment of my CO2 levels, my heart rate, my blood pressure, and my flow in my leg. And one can see that this is just tidal breathing. It's normal in, normal out, like a wave lapping up on the ocean bed. And MSNA is all across, the breath. It keeps modulating with the exhale. But when I start to do Ujjayi, my breath rate slows down, and there's this entrainment of sympathetic nerve outflow. You don't measure vagal nerve, but you measure it by virtue of what's happening with RSA or HRV. But you can see this maximization of HRV and respiratory sinus arrhythmia at this breathing frequency of 5 breaths per minute. So that's what resonance is. What does resonance do to blood pressure? It actually lowers it down. So there's a lot of accumulated research now on slow breathing and what it does to blood pressure and heart rate control. In fact, this was sort of composite collection of all the papers out there over the last 15 years, which looked at the effectiveness of slow breathing on blood pressure and heart rate modulation. It brings it down by almost 5.5 millimeters of mercury. And your diastolics also come down by almost 3 millimeters of mercury. So there's a high heterogeneity to this patient population, but the consistent effect of breathing at resonance or breathing slowly will bring your blood pressure and heart rate down. And what does it do to breathing? And this is obviously near and dear to me, is it actually improves the efficiency of breathing. Now there's a certain part of each breath that you take that is what's called wasted breath. It's dead space breathing. And that sits within the airways that conduct breath all the way from the atmosphere to the lung unit. And that doesn't contribute to gas exchange. So when we subtract that dead space fraction from the entire breath, we come out with what's called alveolar ventilation, which is actually the amount of air that traverses the lung space into the pulmonary circulation and allows for our O2 and our CO2 levels to be modulated. When we breathe slowly, we actually improve the efficiency of gas exchange by decreasing the work of breathing by 15%. And I won't bore you with all of this, but if someone was breathing at 500 breaths a minute, 500 ml per minute, 12 times a minute, that would effectively be 6 liters per minute. And if I had to change their breathing pattern to 6 per minute and increase their volume to about 1 liter, I would be breathing too much because that dead space fraction doesn't change. the alveolar ventilation actually goes up. So in order to keep my gas exchange the same, I would actually need to cut down either the volume of my breath or the respiratory frequency. So this is, in a nutshell, how efficient slow breathing can be for gas exchange. It decreases the work of breathing. It also improves gas exchange. And coming back to that paper, which I was struck by, I just wanted to go a little bit deeper into this because this was about Ujjayi breathing. So there were these 8 Belgian yogis, 6 females and 2 males, who had been practicing Hatha Yoga for about 4 to 12 years. They looked at their ventilation on room air and when they exposed them to CO2. And then they were asked to actually get on a circuit where they were exposed to CO2, but then they were asked to practice Ujjayi Pranayama, what you just learned. This assessment of ventilation by exposing someone to a circuit of CO2 is profoundly panic invoking. Very, very challenging. I've done it to myself because I wanted to replicate exactly what happened in the study. But you get on a circuit and the oxygen mix goes up to 93%, and everything in terms of nitrogen is changed to CO2. And the CO2 content is profoundly panic invoking and it revs up your breathing rate. So what you do is you get on the circuit and you look at your ventilation response vis-a-vis the amount of CO2 that you're exposed to, and you generate what's called a slope of the HCVR, hypercapnic ventilatory response. It's an assessment of how robust your central breathing controlling mechanisms are. Turned out that these yogis who had been doing pranayama and asana for many years, their slopes were attenuated compared with the controls. And when they had them then do Ujjayi, which is what you just learned, slow, near vital capacity breathing, we didn't do near vital capacity breathing, and then had them do an apnea in between the Ujjayi, and then they assessed their response, lo and behold, it was even further attenuated. But what was the coolest part of this paper is that when they had naive individuals who had never done yoga, who had never done pranayama, practice Ujjayi, their slopes when exposed to CO2 were no different from those who had been doing yoga for 12 years. It was exactly the same. So that was the most remarkable thing about this, that there is something magical about breathing at that frequency, which not only improves gas exchange and ventilation efficiency by 15%, but also makes you less anxious, makes you less panicky when provoked by CO2 on a circuit. And I had to do this for myself. I actually got on a circuit at Spalding, and I had my CO2 levels rise by getting on this mix, such that at the end of a 4-minute exposure, my CO2 was 70 when assessed on my exhale breath. My blood pressure went up, my heart rate went up, but I could sustain the practice because I was doing Ujjayi. And I honestly kid you not, I did not feel any sense of anxiety at the end of this run. The only person who felt anxious was the one who was collecting my measurements. So it can be done. The final, couple of slides is about what slow breathing does for your state of mind, your state of being, your state of emotion. Your breathing reflects your internal metabolic milieu. And if you are angry, it would be large volume and rapid. If you were fearful, it would be chaotic. If you were joyful, it would be large volume and exaltatory in nature. And if you were meditating, it would be slow frequency and shallow. There's wonderful literature. As I said, there's been an explosion with respect to breathing and emotion in the last few years coming out of UCLA, where Jack Feldman's group has actually looked at this bi-directional relationship between breathing, emotional, and cognitive states, and looked at pranayama and tai chi in particular, and the effects on brain rhythms, vagus nerve output, as well as CO2 levels. How is this mediated? It's mediated through the gatekeeper, what's called the NTS, the nucleus of tractus solitarius, and its pathways on attention, relaxation, and memory, such that all of these inputs finally play out on our physiology through the autonomic network or the autonomic cascade, sympathetic, parasympathetic to create this effect of well-being and peace within us. There's a lot of emphasis on nasal breathing and how it consolidates memory, and hence a lot of emphasis on nasal breathing in pranayama. There was a lovely paper that came out earlier this year through Andrew Huberman's lab in Stanford, where they actually did this during COVID. They compared breathwork, 5-minute breathwork routines with mindfulness meditation over a period of 4 weeks, looking at measures in respiration, blood pressure, heart rate variability, as well as emotion. And they found that just with a 5-minute practice over 4 weeks, cyclic sighing, which is one of the breathing techniques that was taught, that's a fancy medical word for ujjayi pranayama, which you just learned today, was the most potent in terms of changing affect, improving positive affect as well as negative affect outcomes. So it was quite remarkable that something as simple as 5 minutes of breathing was much more powerful than mindfulness meditation, which obviously takes time to learn. So breathing can be a really good friend. I won't get into any of these. These are actually applications of breath work on the cardiovascular system and with stress. There was one article that actually came out early this year that caught my attention about slow breathing using heart rate variability biofeedback on memory. This was really exciting because if this really replicates itself, this was actually in a very, very reputed journal, Nature, a simple act of breathing can actually affect amyloid accumulation in both young and old adults. This has to be replicated, obviously, in the patient population. And this was, again, just 4 minutes of 6 weeks of breathing. I will close by giving much respect to my teacher, who is going to turn 92 next month on December 4th. He has been teaching pranayama with an emphasis on the science of breath at this institute in Lonavala, India, which is about an hour away from Mumbai in a hill station. He has just one lung. The other lung was ravaged by tuberculosis when he was very young. He still teaches breath. He does his own breath practice for about 45 minutes every morning, and he runs the institute, God bless him, for about 3 hours every day. Just a master teacher and a very, very sweet soul. We are actually creating something with the help of musicians from Berkeley to make this fun. I don't want it to be breath work. I want this to be breath play. And music is a rhythm that actually supports, just like you appreciated today, the practice. And when done together, both don't need the spoken word. Both are rhythms that can change and your internal physiology. They're both synergistic and exponential. And so with this, I will close my presentation and be happy to take any questions from you. Thank you so much for your attention.
Wow. Thank you so much. I have the sense we just skimmed the surface of pranayama. This is clearly something that, you've given us a tool to start experimenting with it. What really resonated with me is that bidirectional sense that our emotions affect our breathing and our breathing affects our emotions. And any of us who've, watched a kid playing baseball and the coach is yelling, take a deep breath, take a deep breath. Or we say to ourselves, breathe. And it's actually very hard to do that when you're feeling anxious in the moment. But I imagine some of this carries over so that if you do it for 5 or 10 minutes every day when you're calm, it's sort of like training for a marathon, so that when the time comes and you actually need it, your muscles are ready. But can you comment a little more on that how to harness it when you're in that moment of anxiety? And it's the hardest thing in the world to slow your breathing down.
This is absolutely true, Dara. In fact, this is the whole challenge about when does state become trait? When does the practice and the experience during the practice start to resonate outside of it? All right? I mean, Huberman's lab has actually shown you that in 4 weeks, your respiratory rate comes down. I will tell you that it probably takes a little longer to develop a trait effect, probably 3 months of doing this at least 15 to 20 minutes a day, but it will change. Your heart rate variability will increase. Your emotional state will start to reflect it, your posture will start to reflect it, as will your cardiovascular parameters. So in my estimation, it's probably, like they say, 42 days and 42 nights, a good habit to make or break,
Yep.
probably in the 3-month period.
But
But done consistently, it can certainly help you in a period of stress.
and certainly, they're looking at breathing as one of the few proven treatments for long COVID, right? Because you can start to train your vagal parasympathetic system and activate it, and sort of that dysautonomia that comes when your sympathetic is in overdrive, and getting that balance back.
100% true. I mean, we've all sort of lived this experience, in the ICU, is sympathetic storms, adrenal fatigue, complete dysregulation of the autonomic system post-COVID, and the symptoms that go with this. But breath is actually being studied at Sinai with in New York with a group that's looking at breath work in terms of COVID long haul. Even at the BI, there's someone who's studying pranayama on long haul COVID. Straightforward, ujjayi. You make a habit of ujjayi. Watch.
Amazing. So someone's asking about whether this could help sleep apnea. And as you talk about state versus trait, I imagine it strengthens your diaphragm, regulates breathing. I mean, of course, when we're sleeping, we can't control our breathing, but do you think it would carry over for something like that?
So what you have learned today is only one aspect of the entire tradition. I mean, there are so many other aspects to pranayama, and posture is one of them. The muscular techniques for the tongue, the face, the pharyngeal wall, the neck, which can tone up the dilator muscles of the airway. There is a subset of sleep apnea. It's called complex physiology sleep apnea. So it's mixed physiology sleep apnea. There's an override between obstruction and central, and you put them on PAP and all hell breaks loose because they get hypocapnic. There's that element of sleep apnea that can be benefited from breath control, where you attenuate the ventilatory response on PAP to actually make it less robust, so that they don't struggle as much with central apnea on PAP. So treatment emergent central apnea can be benefited. But there are many aspects to this that will help sleep, not only sleep disordered breathing, but sleep. Because you can imagine that a lot of the insomnia that goes with sleep apnea is hypervigilance, right? I mean, they're constantly being aroused. Their sympathetic nervous systems are on fire. And you de-attenuate this whole response, the insomnia component gets better also, not just the breathing component.
Absolutely. Gosh, okay. There are so many questions, and
I will just jump in here quickly
ahead,
and say thank you. Amit, this was just wonderful. And I think the pressing question on everyone's mind is, how do we do a formal course, and how can we learn more about this? Are there teaching or classes that you can point us towards?
Yeah, so I'm developing a program online right now to take everyone through the 7-step program that I teach, because what I teach is a subset of this big tradition. I'm only doing it with what I know to be validated by science to be safe. And if there are going to be contraindications to a certain part of the technique, I'm going to tell you, hey, this is not for COPD, this is not for someone who's had a pneumothorax, this is not for someone who's in AFib. So my teaching will be with that intention in mind. But for people who want to learn pranayama, there are lots of opportunities online. I'd be happy to do a workshop. If there was an interest from your group, I'd do a 2-hour workshop, a 4-hour workshop. I was just in Park City, Utah, just about 3 weeks ago, and we did a whole day workshop, with the U.S. ski team. So there's so many applications to this. Allison, I'm happy to share all of this, with your group, and we can sort of build it up if you want, over a period of weeks, whatever you want, whatever the format. But in terms of what I teach, look out for it in the next 6 months. It's going to be coming.
Well, that sounds wonderful. And I'm just gauging from all the questions that are being typed in that I think we can brainstorm and maybe solicit some response from our patients and who would be interested in a workshop, because I think everyone is interested in how a simple technique like this can really change the quality of their life and the way they handle stress and sleep and optimal health, as we're all striving for that.
And the beauty of doing it in Boston is that I have Berkeley right next door. The musicians who are creating the app for me with the music and the breath, they're right here. So they'd come and play live music to breath if we did this somewhere.
amazing.
Oh, so yes, I didn't catch that. Berkeley School of Music, local. I was thinking you were connecting with the other coast. So that's fun. That's great.
That would be amazing. I think that we just have
Yeah,
to.
no, my pleasure. My pleasure. Anytime. Let's be in touch, and happy to share this teaching and this tradition. It's clearly benefited me, obviously, during my dark days in March, April, May 2020. It kind of kept me sane through all of this. Just making this, at that point in time, it was an epiphany, that I had, is that let me make this the work of my day, and then let the rest of the day follow. As opposed to just using it as a crutch to get through tough periods in my life, it became my work.
Hmm.
And when that happens, watch out.
That's great. That's a nice challenge, I think, to everybody, right? As you're kind of thinking about, gosh, what can I really do in this next month, and how can I prioritize, right, my health? I think that's a really nice challenge to put forward, and probably a very positive note to end on.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. So you covered so many things in terms of sort of a dipping our toe in the water of Ujjayi breathing, and then also just introducing us to some of the potential for lots of different medical concerns and medical problems, as well as just enhancing our sense of wellness and well-being on a day-to-day basis. We're going to save these questions from the chat and the Q&A because there are quite a few that we didn't get to, and Nicole is going to compile them. And if you're willing, we can try to take a stab, but if you could answer some of them, and then we'll send out an email to all our participants, as well as we'll put our heads together and come up with a time that we could offer an in-person workshop. Would be awesome.
My pleasure. Anytime. Delighted to come back and teach more and share more. But yeah, this is what I love doing. As I said, this is becoming a big part of my life now outside of the ICU and the hospital. And the benefits, it says that, when you get into a teaching like this and you make it the work of your day, health happens.
Mm.
Don't go looking for health. Health is a spontaneous byproduct of a technique like this. So wishing you all good breath.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it's amazing that the science is starting to catch up with what some cultures have known for many thousands of years, right?
Yeah, so true, so true. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And our next webinar is going to be on December 4th, and it'll be the Lown staff, and we'll be talking about exercise in various cardiac conditions, including AFib and heart failure. So thank you, Dr. Anand. Thank all of you for participating, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, Dara. Thank you. Bye, Alison. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.